God, come and learn about Him. Here's the Bible with Pastor Adam.
Hey, bet you thought I was coming from that way. Wrong! Hey guys, welcome back. Good morning. Another Wednesday, another time with me. Another time for some Bible reading. Thanks for coming back. So you might remember that last week we were talking about Abraham, a really important person in the Bible. We were in Genesis, I believe, chapters 14 through 17, somewhere around there. This week we're going to continue in Genesis, and we're going to be in chapters 18 through 21. That's where these events will take place. But before we get into our story this week, I want to give you a little bit of context, a little bit of background, because in our children's Bible here, it doesn't talk about this background before we get into today's story. And that background is Abraham and Sarah are getting pretty old at this point in time. And Sarah doesn't believe that she will have children with Abraham. And she starts to get sad, and so she starts to take matters into her own hands. So she convinces her husband, Abraham, to have a child with her servant, Hagar. And because of this, Sarah gets jealous, and she starts to treat her servant, Hagar, really poorly, very rude and very cruel to her. And so Hagar runs away. But God sees Hagar, and he sees how sad she's become and how she's being treated by her master Sarah. And so God says, look, return to your master and submit to her authority, and I will bless you. I will bless you for the woman you are, and I hear you. I hear your sadness, but I will bless you, and you will have a son. So she had a son with Abraham, and that son's name was Ishmael. So, fast forward now to where we are today, and here we go, Genesis 18 through 21. It was a hot day, and Abraham was sitting in the shade of a tree, and suddenly he saw 3 men standing nearby, and he was happy to have these visitors, very happy, and so he welcomed them, and he was very hospitable to them, and he said, "Let me get you something to eat." And so he ran to his tent to get food and milk and yogurt, and he told his servant to go fetch a cow to cook up so they can have a nice meal. And so he served them meat and milk and these nice things. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree, just sort of listening. And one of the visitors was God, and the other 2 were his servants, his angels. And God had chosen Abraham to be the father of a people who would obey God by doing what is right and fair. That's what we talked about last week, if you remember. And now he had come with special news for Abraham. And God said, "I will be back to see you next year, and at that time your wife Sarah will have a son." Remember, Sarah's really old. So to hear this news is going to be kind of shocking, because as we get older, our bodies start to break down and things don't work like they once did. Imagine your grandma or grandpa running really, really, really fast. Probably not going to see that too often because their bodies aren't what they used to be. They're a little weaker and they're breaking down and they get a little slower. So to hear this news is going to be shocking to Abraham, and specifically shocking to Sarah. And so Sarah was standing behind the door of a tent, also listening. And when she heard the news, she laughed. She was an old woman, and women of her age couldn't have children. And so she laughed in disbelief. But God heard Sarah laughing, and he said to her, "Is anything too hard for God?" The answer is no. And the next year, Sarah and Abraham had a son finally, and they named him Isaac. She couldn't believe what she heard, that she was going to have a baby, and so she laughed, and so she named her son Isaac, which means he laughs. This is an important story, and the story that I told you before we began today's reading is also important. Do you ever feel like something is just too hard and maybe even impossible? This story teaches us that when we trust in God, nothing is going to be too hard or impossible, especially for God. God is all powerful, and God is in control of all things. And so God, if He wants to, can make anything happen. Our role as His creation is to be in submission to that. He may want some things to happen, and He may not want some things to happen. Some things may seem really hard, but nothing's too hard for God. Think about that next time you come up to an impossible task. Nothing is too hard for God, and we should put our trust and our faith in God. If He wants it to happen, He'll make it happen. We should learn from Sarah and Abraham that it's not always up to us to take matters into our own hands. We should be submissive and pray to God and listen for His instructions and His calling to us. Think about that next time something is in front of you that's really tough. Thanks for joining. Next week we're going to read about that son that they had, Isaac. We're going to read about a bride. But that's all for this week, guys. Which way am I going? See ya!